Hello everyone and welcome to Burnt Toaster Productions. I'm your host, Burnt Toaster. Today is a possibly momentous occasion on this channel as I have yet to do a run in Fable 3. That changes today thanks to this wonderful commenter that provided a run idea. Thank you for your suggestion, and as always, if you have suggestions for runs, put them down in the comment section. I'll get to them as soon as I can. Now, let's get to the rules, which for once is possibly the most simple rule reading I've had in a while, as there are only 2 rules. The main one being, I cannot open any chest in the Road to Rule besides the very first, as it provides access to magic. And at least for a bit, that's gonna be my only way to fight until I get weapons. Once I get my hands on some physical weaponry, I'll refrain from using the gauntlet. The second rule is a pretty normal one on my channel. I can only fall in combat 3 times. If I fail, I'll continue to see the run through to the end. Also, as a little side note, I'm almost at 1,000 subscribers, and while I like to keep begging and whatnot to a minimum, I humbly ask you for your assistance in getting to 1,000 before the year is up. It'd mean a lot to me. No pressure though. Without any further ado, let's get into the run, shall we? For once, I'm not some kid in a tiny countryside village or some poor street urchin struggling to make ends meet. Instead, I'm born into royalty. Also, my brother is currently king and a bit of an authoritarian leader. Regardless, we have some things to attend to, such as picking some clothes, meeting with Elise, encouraging the staff, signing a petition, training combat skills with Walter, and trying to appeal to Logan's humanity as he plans on being rid of some demonstrators outside the castle. He basically gives me an ultimatum, telling me to choose the demonstrators, Elise, or if I refuse to choose, all of them will be dealt with. Well, thinking about it, I would consider this prince to be Rock's child due to the lack of any upgrade to weaponry. I chose to save the demonstrators as they are the greater number of people who are simply letting their voice be heard. With that decision made, Walter comes to me and lets me know we're getting out of the castle to start a revolution. But first, we must visit Rock's tomb to grab the guild seal. Once I have acquired the seal, I get introduced to Teresa and, of course, the Road to Rule, which essentially serves as a way to level up. In order to progress, I must unlock the first chest, granting me the gauntlet and the fireball spell. Since I have no other available weapon, I must use it to fry some bats as we make our way out of the cave. Until we reach the end where I have to cast the spell to activate a call escape. That leads us to the sanctuary. After a brief explanation from Jasper about what it is, it's time to set out and head over to Mistpeak as Walter says that the people there will make good allies against Logan. As we make our way through Mistpeak, Walter suggests a change of clothes, so I fit in a little bit better. Okay, valid. He hands me some gold and tells me to go get said clothes. Once I've donned my new attire, I pop back into Mistpeak and can talk with the leader of the dwellers, Sabine, who says he'll join me if I perform 3 tasks for him: gathering a relic to prove I'm a hero, go deal with some mercenaries, and convince Brightwall to share some food with the dwellers of Mistpeak. Well, there's nothing else to really do, so I start my journey to Brightwall. On my way there, I came across some wolves. Now, yes, I could likely run by them, but I need to get back into the swing of things with this game as it has been a solid few years since I last played it. So I blast them with magical fire. Guess you could say I made some hot dogs. Besides the occasional handful of wolves, there's not really any other danger here at the moment. When I've made it to Brightwall Academy, I show Samuel my seal and he leads me to the entrance of the secret underground area. Normally I'd loot the entire place because the little loot goblin in my mind would scream otherwise, but I was wanting to get some weapons. And thankfully I can receive my first melee weapon. The only disappointing aspect is the fact that I can only choose between a sword and a big hammer. Seeing as I'm more of a sword lover myself, I go for that. I then get my first taste of genuine melee combat experience against hollow men. They're not tough at all, but of course they're one of the first enemies I have to fight, so yeah, that's to be expected. I'll give Fable 3 some credit. It seems a fair bit easier to defeat an enemy on the ground compared to Fable 2. Though the controls feel a wee bit sluggish. Anyway, for a bit it's more of the same. Loot some chests, fight some hollow men until I reach the next flit switch. This one requires a ranged implement to activate. Seeing as I have a sword, I decided to settle on the pistol. It's far from the greatest, but it'll get the job done. 2 shots to the animated bones is all it takes, unless they're of the bigger variety. Regardless, the bony boys are no match for my strength and skill. Once they've been put back to rest, I can claim my prize, the music box. Teresa also drops by and shows me a little bit of Logan monologuing to himself, then unlocking the next part of the Road to Rule. I just run past everything as it'll chip away at my sanity if I stay for too long. When I'm back in the real world, I give Samuel a start by appearing directly in front of him without warning. Jasper alerts me that Walter wishes to see me in the tavern as he has an idea on what to do about the mercenaries. He got one of them utterly hammered and gave me his clothes. However, since I'm going undercover here, I need a matching tattoo and his beard. Walter is out of free money, so I must acquire the wealth in some other fashion. Seeing as jobs are incredibly dull and I can't eventually upgrade them so I make more money, I just sell off all the loot I've acquired thus far. When I've bought both the beard and tattoo, I go to the sanctuary and get in my new outfit. Time to head to that camp. For the first bit, everything was fine, smooth. Although I'd eventually be found out as an imposter as I didn't have Jimmy's periwinkle eyes. I was itching for a bit of combat anyway, so I used a healthy mix of my sword and firearm. Around the end, I did start to rely on the pistol some more. It was simply easier to take them out from a distance, especially when there were a couple of them around a barrel of gunpowder. Naturally, it all comes to a head where I must fight Saker and some more of his men. This was a tiny bit difficult as Saker is a rather tanky fellow, and having his men drop down to harass me while we fight isn't what I'd call ideal conditions. Doesn't help that Saker will also throw Molotovs my way. But I'm nothing if not persistent. It just takes some time and careful maneuvering to get him to yield. I then have my first moral choice to spare or finish Saker. I chose to spare him. Not like it really does anything mechanically speaking, but hey, why not just let him live? With that over, Walter is waiting for me in the tavern again with information to help with the third and final task. The goal is simple. I have to help the people of Brightwall with their issues, defeat enough enemies, or interact with enough people to gain 30 guild seals, or a mix of all three. Questing is by far the most efficient way of doing things. Before I do anything though, I stop to get a fitting hairstyle for Rock's son. Having acquired a full head of hair, I set out to help two locals find a lost play. The thing is, in order to get it, I must complete scenes from 3 plays. I just follow along with what's supposed to happen. Just felt like trying to do the guy's stuff justice. Horribly, but, well, you take what you can get. Once playtime is over, I deliver the last play to Lambert and Pinch, and yeah, their show didn't go too well. On to the next quest. The task is pretty simple. I have to go around town dressed as a chicken and gather 3 groups of chickens to bring them back to the quest giver. Of course, there's a slight moral quandary regarding what to do with the chickens now that they've been gathered. Bernard wants to kill them, which is not for the reason any sane person expects, and his wife wants them to remain in the land of the living. Once again for a fairly goofy reason. Well, seeing as I've got a soft spot for the feathery fiends, I chose to spare them. Completing the quest has given me the rest of the guild seals I need to get Brightwall to send some food to the dwellers. However, I have to promise that once I'm king, I'll reopen the Brightwall Academy. Speaking of dwellers, I go back to Mistpeak to talk with Sabine about the alliance. He'll be willing to support me so long I promise to restore the mountain to the way it was and provide his people protections. With that secured, Walter tells me to meet him at the monorail station nearby. My journey to the monorail was pretty uneventful. I fought some wolves and a group of mercs. Eventually, I reached the monorail station and meet up with Walter. As the monorail was reaching its destination, it ended up falling in spectacular fashion. With no other way to move forward, Walter and I head down through the elevator. The cause of the monorail falling was no other than some hobs. Crafty little fellows, it seems. In combat, they're not really all that bad to fight. Pretty weak overall, though they can start becoming a pain in large groups. But then it goes back to being easy as I get to participate in a hob shooting gallery. The barrels of gunpowder really helped out with that. Of course, the entire thing's not quite so easy as the tougher variant starts showing up. Though they're still not exactly the most difficult enemies to fight. Just have to knock them down and put the sword through them. Anyway, as Walter and I made our way through the cavern, a magical hob had blocked the way forward, which meant I had to find a way around and dispatch the little gremlin. The main issue with the magic-based hobs is the fact that they'll perform necromancy, and when the hob in question has been defeated, the skeletal hobs do not cease their unlife. Well, they still fall like all the rest. Walter and I get through to an arena of hobs, consisting mostly of the undead variety and 3 magical hobs in the center. Teresa calls me to the road and essentially tells me I did a good job as a hob exterminator. When I've returned to the mortal world, Walter has an idea to get through the hob currently holding a magical barrier up in our only exit. He decided to spook the bejesus out of it and give it a heart attack. RAP, little guy. The path now clear, we can make our way out and into Morningwood. What a phonetically unfortunate name for a location. This place is a rather depressing-looking swampy area. During our walk to the fort, I open a chest and get the Bone Smasher. It does a little bit better than my current pistol, and considering it's not part of the Road to Rule, it's good to use. That aside, the reason we're here is to recruit the soldiers staying at a fort nearby. But first, I must help them survive the night by blowing hollow men to bits with a mortar. However, things don't stay so simple for too long as they breach the rear gate and start coming in. During the wave defense, Private Jammy sadly fell in combat, bravely fighting until his last breath. I tried my best to keep him alive, but I was simply not dealing enough damage to swiftly deal with the walking corpses of men long dead. Eventually they stop coming through, but nothing's ever simple as Lieutenant Simmons rises from the dead and brings more in. In other words, it's a little boss fight. A rather tedious one at that. I need to focus Simmons down, but at the same time I need to thin out the herd as they'll make it nearly impossible to handle the bigger threat. But I also have to try to keep one around as Simmons here will spawn more of them in. After what felt like a dog's age, I put Simmons back to rest and then can talk to Major Swift about him and his men joining us in our revolution, which he agreed to pretty quickly. I mean, I did just save his and some of his men's lives, so that makes sense. I just have to promise that he'll be in charge of the Royal Army, which I have no complaints about. Destruction of the recently reanimated finished, it's time to press onward to Bowerstone, particularly the industrial area. There, Walter said we could find a resistance group that has been active for a bit. They're just in the sewer somewhere. Thankfully, Walter knows just where to look. But before we make it there, I get to see Reaver being himself and shooting a worker who had been trying to rile the others up to demand basic human rights. Putting that behind us, we make it to the Resistance HQ. They gave us a rather warm welcome, aiming firearms at us and coming close to firing them. Thankfully, Paige, their leader, stopped them before that happened. To keep it short and sweet, she's all for tossing Logan off the throne, but she, understandably, wants to have some sort of proof as to the kind of person I am. In other words, I have to do some side quests and help people out. The first quest was the game. 3 guys want me to miniaturize myself so I can take on their knockoff D&D campaign. It's nothing particularly crazy. Listen to some cheesy voice acting, fight some things, strike the Baron down with a sword I find, and then refuse to embrace the princess. In all, it was just a fun, goofy side quest. Something I like to see in games from time to time. After the quest, I took a trip to Bowerstone's market and came across a rather glorious mustache. I would have preferred something closer to what Rock had, but this will work. I then decided on the kidnapped quest. A guy has had his girlfriend taken from him by a criminal organization and wants help retrieving her. It's a relatively straightforward quest where I fight some mercenaries, corner the gang leader, jump into the sewers to find the woman in question, and fight some hobs as we make our way out. She has found herself rather interested in me, in which I offer no comment as far as encouraging a particular decision. She decided to stick with the guy at least for a while. Regardless, the quest is complete and I can now leave. Thank God. It's a bit awkward hearing someone be very generous with compliments about someone while talking straight to their partner's face. With that done, I took a job as a postboy where I was to deliver a mean letter to someone in Brightwall. Extremely quick and easy, that one. The next big boy quest was Bored to Death. Sam and Max are naturally no longer alive, however their spirits are still around and they're rather bored. To alleviate their boredom, they want me to go retrieve that troublesome book from their mother's grave. Once I have made it to her grave and have exhumed the book, I get to fight a nice amount of hollow men. It's a fair challenge without upgraded weapons because the area is so closed in and they have a numbers advantage. Still, it simply took a while. Around the end is where things got rather tedious. I had to fight one of those hollow men that could call in some friends, and those friends were of the tougher stock compared to the usual ones. Still, they couldn't defeat me and I came out victorious. Mrs. Spade was even impressed enough with my fighting ability to allow me to take the book without any further issues. So I gave it to the brothers and they summoned a ghost party. Having helped enough people, I can return to Paige. But before I can actually recruit Paige and her fellow revolutionaries, I must help her out with a small task. A group of resistance fighters managed to break into Reaver's mansion and haven't come back. Since he was throwing one of those posh masquerade balls, Paige set me up with a proper outfit so we could sneak in and try to find those resistance members. Once inside, we're lulled into a slight false sense of security as we find a single member of the group that came in here. Of course, Reaver has his cage hoisted up, which means rather than having to navigate a secret society party, we must fight in an arena of sorts. Starting with Hobbs. Honestly, this entire section is more of the same as far as combat goes. A lot of the same enemies and heavy reliance on the same strategy I've been using. Lots of flourishing and stabbing. Except for the later part of the mercenary round due to those big guys. But I do get a new foe to fight, that being the Sand Furies. And to be honest, the same tactic I've been using applies. Knock them down and put a sharp, pointy metal stick through their chests. Simple. Though they are rather quick and fairly capable of evasion, as well as being able to use range attacks with their miniature crossbows. Still, not all that bad. The final round also consists of fighting another new enemy, at least for this game. Balverines. Not much has changed between Fable 2 and 3 in regards to the way they behave. They still charge, still have that long combo, and are generally a bit of a nuisance. However, my knockdown strategy works pretty well. For the most part. Reaver, in his ever-calculating ways, decides to leave me be as he doesn't want to get in between a sibling dispute. With Kid rescued, Paige wants me to promise to end the exploitation of the people of bowerstone. Now that I have some downtime, I sell some things, track down a criminal, and with my newfound wealth, buy most of the warrior outfit. They sadly didn't have the gauntlets. Moving on, Logan seems to have caught Major Swift trying to turn soldiers over to fight for the rebellion. You can guess what happened. Heading back to the Resistance HQ, Swift thankfully managed to get us some info on where to look for more allies. A place called Aurora. Only issue is it's across the ocean. Walter does have a plan to get over there. We basically need to steal a ship and set sail as soon as possible before we get boarded or blown to bits. In order to get said ship, I go with Ben to see if we can possibly get through without a fight. Ben, being the smooth talker out of the two of us, tries to charm his way through. I see it won't work and kick things off with a pistol shot. Logan's elite guards are a fair bit annoying thanks to their rifles having a pretty high capacity. Though, just like with everything else, some flourishing and shanking them while they're down on the ground works wonders. Thankfully, the closest vessel that could have followed us ended up sinking, and we found a suitable ship to take us to Aurora. That doesn't last very long as we get hit by one good broadside to port, sinking our vessel. An unknown amount of time passes and we've washed ashore, although Ben is nowhere to be found. Walter, however, is here, and with nothing else to do, we press onward into a creepy temple. This temple is a hellish place, mostly dark with something whispering as Walter and I make our way through. Of course, we're beset by shadows, which are extremely easy to defeat. A single hit from any of my weapons is enough to take them down. As we continue, Walter seems to become more panicked and paranoid as time goes on. Which, okay, that's genuinely understandable. Eventually, after fighting off some more shadows, Walter gets tired of hearing the crawler's incessant speech and throws our torch right at its face. This leaves us without a torch, and in order to progress, we must jump down. Before Walter psychs him up to jump down, the crawler gets to him and takes him elsewhere. Now I'm all alone with my faithful hound and must fight off more shadows. Some fighting and walking later, I find Walter, who is immobilized in some black sludge. Now starts the section I've been a bit nervous about since I've started this run. I have to fight off waves of enemies, starting with shadows. It's pretty relaxed, but after defeating several waves of them, they get smart, and now I have to deal with dark minions. These guys are pretty tough, have some decently speedy attacks, a long combo, a numbers advantage, and while they can be knocked over, I couldn't seem to stick my blade into them. It slowed the fight down to a crawl. Took me roughly 11 or so minutes to get through all of them until the next and final fight. That being with a sentinel. This single enemy is not fun to fight when you don't have any weapon or magic upgrades, period. A frontal assault is completely out of the question, and my ranged options leave more than just a little to be desired. In other words, it's tanky, kind of annoying, and incredibly tedious. By some miracle, I did manage to take it down, and the fight was shorter than the dark minions, but it didn't feel like that during the whole thing. All the nearby nasties defeated, I can grab onto Walter's hand and lead him out of here, seeing as he was blinded while I fought. He tried to tell me to leave him behind, but Walter's a real one, so I dragged him as far as I can before he collapses and I must run through the desert while the crawler tries to play with my mind. Before inevitably collapsing from exhaustion because I spent I don't know how long fighting and my fantasy English body can't handle the heat. Hope's not lost as Ben and Kaylin find me outside the city, then search for Walter. Once I'm as fit as a fiddle, Kaylin shows me her city, which is desolate and depressing. She then suggests I go explore a bit and see what has happened thanks to Logan breaking his promise. After finding a guy who doesn't fear joining his loved ones in the afterlife, I go back to Kaylin, who asks me to promise to rebuild and allow Aurora to properly be a part of the kingdom before she'll join the rebellion. Once everyone is good to go, including Walter, it's time to sail back to Albion and start this war to usurp the throne. My first wartime task is to take out a mortar that's raining holy hellfire upon us. It simply took a little time as there were a fair amount of guards to cut through. The mortar now silenced, Caitlin blasts the gate down and allows us to run in to take care of business. Said business involves a lot of fighting, until we can get access to the castle properly, where Logan is taken into custody and I am finally named King of Albion. The next bit of gameplay involves trying to save as much money as possible so that the people of Albion will be safe when the crawler makes its way over here. It mostly means a lot of choices and a few quests. I decided to spare Logan because I just wanted to. I've had the firing squad deal with him in most of my playthroughs, so I just went for something a bit different. Anyway, the goal is to amass 6.5 million gold to save everyone. However, without any good way to make money, that is a rather tall order. And forget about keeping promises or bettering the lives of my subjects. We need industry and a lot of money, which meant breaking promises, increasing taxes, and pushing for further exploitation of the common man. Or in other words, all the bad choices. The only time I took money from the kingdom's treasury was when I had enough to withdraw 5 million from it and put it in my personal treasury so I could grab the key up at the top and then open the chest. It landed me a decent rifle compared to my current ranged weapon, so I'm not going to complain. That was before the end of the year, and so once time was up, I was only able to amass 5.7 million gold. It's better than nothing, I suppose. It has been a year since I took power, and instead of having a celebration for the anniversary of taking the throne, I get to fight the crawler and its forces. Naturally, the enemy forces consist of shadows, minions, and a couple of sentinels. Anything to drag out the build-up to the final confrontation. It all leads to a moderately sad affair where the crawler possesses Walter, and I must fight him. My best bet with these pitiful weapons is to use distance to my advantage. Possessed Walter's attacks are easier to dodge that way. It's just a bit dull when it goes on for a good 7 minutes. There's not too many surprises that are really all that notable. Only concerning ability was the fact that he could teleport behind me and hit me if I was caught unawares. Regardless, I eventually defeated the possessed Walter, and it cost him his life. And with that, the run is finished. I wanted to see how my weapons would morph. Since the run was completed, I figured it wouldn't hurt. So I went to the end of the road to rule to acquire the upgrades for my melee and ranged weapons. Boy, was I sad when I couldn't use them. The hammer actually looks pretty cool and I would have used it just for the appearance alone. But, oh well. This run wasn't all that bad for most of the game. Got a bit testing around the end because of 2 enemy types that were pretty resilient. Still, it was nice to play Fable 3 for a change. It's been a number of years since I last touched it. Anyway, thank you all for watching. If you've made it this far, consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and hitting the bell like this is a Long John Silver's. As always, if you have a run idea that you would like to see me attempt, go ahead and put it in the comments section. This has been Burnt Toaster from Burnt Toaster Productions, and I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.